Oi right bags, it's Jade. Welcome to part 2 of my leaks cut content video. The stuff that has never made it to grounded and most likely won't. You've seen part 1 where I showed off the inside of the shed and showed off more about the wasps as well as some of the other creatures like the ant queen, lizard and armors and weapons. These were all a lot from the big leak that happened only 3 or 4 weeks before the full release of Grounded. If you haven't seen this video, go and watch it after this one. Today we're going to focus on some of the big stuff that didn't make it, like big pond creatures, also looking at defensive traps and just why some of that stuff never really got there, as well as a whole host of other things like boxing gloves in Grounded, secret sign sets, leeches, wall striders and more. Let's go, everything that didn't make it to Grounded. Part 2. So if you're interested in this kind of stuff, you can actually find a way to load up older worlds on Steam. Look it up, or I'll even pin it somewhere in my Discord channel where you can see all of these leaks, all of the pictures from the first video as well, if you want to take a look yourself. But yeah, the pond world was one of the earliest ones that I really showed off, and this is what got me going into it. And leeches. The general consensus is that the leeches were pretty much just attacking everything. They couldn't think of a way to make them more constrained, and yeah, there was just a real serious bug with them, as you can see, the way that they move around. I always assumed they would get added to the upper yard pond, and hence why it'd be like a tier 2 pond, why we would need maybe some things that I'm going to show you, like you can see there we've got the harpoon gun. But no, they added obviously just a variant of the water fleas. To be honest, the water fleas do the same job though. They do just run around in big circles and they will attack you as soon as you step foot in the water. So I'm sure they've probably got some of the AI of that leech. We've got scary spiders in the game. Maybe the leeches were just a bit too scary or just a bit too weird looking. I'm not too sure. Is it a common occurrence to have leeches in just your everyday backyard pond? And only leech sacks as came from them, you can see why maybe they never really made it. But this was actually added not just to the dev world to be cheated in, this was in the PTB for a couple of weeks. And then when they didn't actually show up in the full build, we was all like, what? No way, I'm sure this is meant to be there. I think that's what happened anyway. These wall striders don't do anything, and you can see again why maybe it was early cut content. The Wall Strider skates, which I'll show you a bit in a second as well, they were obviously cut, but they are the ones that you can still mess around with. Clearly, yeah, the AI was never done for them. They did have a health pool. I think you could actually kill them and then pick it up, but sometimes they would crash the game. No idea if they would be aggressive or not. The pond is quite large, and even with the upper pond, it's quite a big area to explore, but is it as important as the rest of the yard? Probably not, hence why they didn't bother adding any more creatures. One thing I would have liked to have seen maybe added though was something more in terms of doing damage against creatures in water. We rely on spears and daggers. This one's a bit of an old leak again, I've shown this off in actual gameplay. It was a harpoon and it fired a whole host of different bolts. Now the majority of these bolt types have been added to the game. We do have a venom, a poison, as well as obviously a bone bolt, which I'm guessing is now like a splinter bolt or splinter arrow. But yeah, this did actually work. You could fire it off and it would kill creatures using it. Obviously, it was a bit of a weird one. The animations maybe weren't right for it. I guess the thinking was it worth investing in weapons when you only spend maybe 20% of the time inside these areas? I think it was called a tactical harpoon gun, which led me to believe that maybe there was 2 versions of it, and the tactical one would have obviously a torch on the end of it. But this stuff was absolutely guaranteed, told by Andy, one of the Grounded devs, as being cut content early on. In fact, they played around with this and then decided it just wasn't for them at all. But then Adam said that maybe cut content could make a return. Them Grounded devs, always twisting and messing around with the tail. A lot of this stuff was made by Black Shamrock, an outsourcing virtuoso company, basically helping with assets and stuff for smaller teams. They did a lot of work for the pond by the looks of stuff. And yeah, the idea of these skates was that you'd be able to skate across the water, but they never work. You can still use them now. There's ways that you can put the cheats on, spawn them in, but they just don't do anything. Amongst that pond content, of course, there were some drops from them enemies, like the leech sack, and stuff that never really got used, which is the cottontail fluff. The idea of this was it would have just been there on the cottontails and you would have been maybe able to gather it or shoot it off with a bow and arrow. There are some other interesting parts as well. When you kill a water flea at the moment, we only get the same drops that you do for killing the regular water flea. But there was a point where there was going to be a spine that you got from it. Here's the spine picture itself. Again, I can only presume that maybe this was just a bit too gory or too actual pinpoint in anatomy. or they just couldn't really get it to make sense in terms of adding it to a weapon. Over early access, we've had lots of things that have changed, but that's pretty much it for armor. There's only one more weapon that seemingly made it into the dev world that we haven't seen. Now, at first glance, I thought that this was going to be a mantis bow. And it could be, it does feel like it is utilising maybe the claws of the mantis. But on reflection, what if it's not? What if it's a moth bow? The moth does feel a bit lackluster in terms of obviously having armour and stuff that you can craft out with it, but no real weapons. Since we haven't got gliders in the game yet, that would be the obvious answer. So I'm going to say that I think this was probably a moth bow rather than a mantis bow. There's not much going on in the files in terms of this. So now I'm going to rattle off a few items that have maybe been in the game since day one. I've even shown some of them off at times. The Clover glider. It was never more than that. It didn't go into your accessory actual slot. We still don't know what it would have done. We can only presume that they thought about maybe having it as flapping wings. Or again, it was just a placeholder. And Confuser Bomb. Knocks ants senseless. Could this be or something to do with the actual pheromones? Why would you need something specifically for ants? We know now with the Orc, obviously the mines that you can put down, they can stun and do damage to Orc controlled creatures. So I got a feeling this is what that morphed into. There used to be the Rotten Black Ant Shovel. Obviously we have it in the game already, but they decided not to have a early version of it anywhere. Ant Boxing Gloves. Again, you could never get these as a model on them, but there was actually ant and berry boxing wraps. Maybe to help out with an unarmed build. I'm pretty sure this got morphed into the trinket now, the unarmed one, the power droplet. Obviously good for stunning creatures and a bit of speed. The Dragonfly Slayer was simply a really rubbish default kind of sword. They also had one called the Gum Sword, and it could kill anything almost in one swoop when I used to mess around with it back in the day. I was convinced we would see this added to the game. It's the only evidence we've ever seen that there would be maybe tier 4 items. And given that there's a lot of codenames associated with flying creatures or flying boss, I did once assume that we would get a dragonfly boss. But as it turns out, we think that the flying boss would have been a flying wasp boss. Judging by what you got from it, that would have been the best bet. The devs also at one point thought about adding a compass to the game that you'd be able to look out properly, but that was probably a bit too hardcore of a survival mechanic. And so now we just know there's a compass on the map screen. So it's not too hard to work out exactly what direction you're going into. It would just been another item cluttering up your inventory. Some things that everyone under the sun shown off, like shiny ant heads or pickable leaves. They messed around at one point with stuff like that. And we do have some pictures of the ant pheromone, pretty generic sort of purple splash. Fertilizer's never been added to the game properly, even though we've got a whole bag of it there. Instead we use rotten food to help grow our plants easier or quicker. Old removed stuff, quartzite shards, ended up pretty much being morphed into the quartzite brittle shards. And at one point they were going to have stink bug plating, maybe to make some sort of stink bug armor, or maybe it could have been something to actually help make stronger armors. Then things again like ladybug wings, weevil parts, grub faceplate. A lot of this is just to do with the very early stages of the game. It was never fleshed out or done anything with, just ideas that they threw away to maybe make it a bit simpler when looting bugs. We see the lily pad membrane and the cattail fluff. At one point you could actually chop up the membranes, and then a leech sac as well. Now, there is a fire ant egg in the game. Well, there was. Could this be a return in the future with maybe that tier 3 bomb? Hardened sprig and resin seems to be a jettisoned idea for upgrade parts. Likewise, more parts as well, like ant hazard. One of the things I'm most upset about is we didn't get my honey traps or ice traps. I was convinced we would see more of this stuff coming, especially as we knew that there would be more defensive stuff. But the devs have pretty much said lately they're looking for new ideas again. They will add some more defensive stuff, but it doesn't look like it's ever going to be actual honey plates or any of the ice stuff. The honey slowed creatures down. I've shown it off in a bunch of videos in the past, and the ice sped things up. More so even than just helping with defense, it was kind of fun features to use or do something with. Of course we do have honey with the honey pot, and it does have honey inside, but you can't gather it up. And something that's been in there from day one, raw cricket meat. Crickets were never added, seemingly never spoken about again. This is meant to reference a mosquito egg. Could that be a possibility again of just the tier 3 bomb you'd need to kill mosquitoes for? So thorns at one point were going to be attached to roses. I think that's been pretty much put over to obviously the plants that we get to make our arrows. One that relatively only got added in the last year was dark mold clump, but no further use, no real file action in there saying it could be made in something else. And then things that have actually been moved, like Eye Patch Plus, you can't actually upgrade it past that point anymore. There used to be a chip or some bug or a science reward that you could buy, I think. The Rotten Gas Mask got removed last year. Ultimate Armor Glue has made a return in just being called Armor Glue. That was another idea they tried out in the early days. And the Acorn Shovel Plus, which I'm sure just basically was useless after you've got the Black Ant Shovel. There's a few pictures that haven't made it into any of the sign sets as far as we know, like this googly eye one. That absolutely looks like Adam Brennecke, the game director. Broken Wishbone? And this one's got to be the maddest one of all. I have no idea what this is referencing, but a bug made out of very different bug parts by the looks of things. This could be a reference to the ability to control maybe ants, with the ants holding us up as their king, or just a reference to one of the Omnium workers that goes a bit mad and basically thinks he is the Ant King. Hence why we've got this picture as well. There are some strange sounding robot noises in the game.
Activation complete. Enemy detected. Attack. BS-2000 operative and ready for order.
Obviously cut content or maybe modified and actually added to Schmector. The Limerick though was a codename for another creature. So honestly, who knows? And lastly, a few things like Obsidian, obviously a homage to the company name, but never was used or something to actually craft or make with. And most recently, I showed you guys the helicopter. This was just a bit of fun, something the devs contemplated in the early days, but never took it any further. There was a bit of a weird obsession, or still is, with people trying to get into some of these dev worlds. You will never be able to explore these stuff again. It was a mistake put through the Windows world, and they removed the commands to explore a lot of these stuff in early days. The only way you can explore some of this stuff is if you load up an older version of Grounded on Steam. That requires quite a bit of effort, and then you know the commands to activate it and stuff. But this was the dev world, the testing world proper, where they would test stuff maybe for scale and just spawn stuff in rather than a whole big massive world to render. Something I showed off to good effect ages ago. This is where we first saw something like the wasp nest, which would eventually turn into a bee nest, but that bee nest model would change massively. At one point I thought we was going to get Evil Max because there was a Max model with black eyes and shorter cropped hair, but clearly just a early version of him. And all us tubers had managed to mess around with Boney because it was a glitch that you could do with the game where sometimes you'd respawn as Boney and then we'd keep that save and you could be Boney forever. But again, it was just a character model reference just for helping with sizing stuff up. There is a lot of mystery around the 5th container slot for Grounded. Some people suggesting it could be a DLC character in the future. Others just think it's just a spare slot. We'll never know, I guess. Maybe one day the secrets will be revealed. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of the bonies lying around that you get the remnants from the Omnant explorers. This is a cool item as well. This was the leaf blower. I was convinced this might be something we could use to get airborne. It was a weapon that did like the tiniest amount of damage. I guess this was a concept to move stuff around using the power of wind, possibly, as it does so little damage to creatures. For some reason, I just thought it would be something that would help you propel when you're running around since it was called the blower. But yeah, maybe it was going to be a machinery part that you could craft and make. It's all been a bit doom and gloom. All this stuff's never come in, but there could be stuff in the future that does make it, and that's the defense stuff. As I said, the devs are looking for ideas. A lot of these things just never made it, like the plasma orb, the catapult, that's never made it to the game, as well as the honey and the ice traps. I have got this video up, so I won't go over this too much already. But yes, I did show this off most recently and again when it first came out. That's why I was convinced it would come. But they never had any changes. They were basically stones, and these would either be ice or honey, and the honey would slow you down, the ice would speed you up. But I thought it could be good for traversal. Imagine making a highway made out of the ice ones to speed you up as you go along. They didn't particularly work too well on creatures, seemingly sometimes, seemingly not. I think that's probably why it was just too much trouble adding. And what value did it really add to defend your base? Now we know the raids are here, there's different ways that creatures can attack you. Maybe it was just a bit too common and simple just to have these types of traps. So join a Discord, the Grounded official one, and give your suggestions about what could be improved, what kind of defences you'd like to see in the future. Now the catapult itself seems super simple, but I love the idea of this. You can see why this was jettisoned as well. It's using a leaf, which is a really old asset. And yeah, the idea that you'd be able to just use that one leaf. I'm guessing that's what was picked up. Maybe clovers would be a better way of using it now. I don't know. But yeah, you stand on it and it will just fling you in the sky. I did like the idea though of it used against creatures. Imagine being able to throw creatures into water and they die instantly, or into some sort of box to keep them like this ant eventually. Go on it, you can do it. Ah, nearly. But sadly no, it never really worked. I couldn't get them to actually be flung by the trap. So really old concepts that clearly were just abandoned. Something called a slingshot turret that would often break the game if you tried putting it down or sitting inside it. It was just basically a chair. They are going to be adding more stuffed creatures and bugs and trophies, and this is something I thought we'd get. Coziness. There was a coziness meter added only last year, but it was something that obviously the devs wanted to not really mess around with too much. But rugs, actually rugs made out of mite fur and bee fuzz. Very much like Valheim system, the idea would be that the more cozy features you had in your base, maybe decorating, stuffed bugs, stuff like this, it would add to a total score, and that would give you some sort of healing buff. Or something positive anyway, and that's exactly how Valheim works. And I know the Grounded devs really love Valheim, so maybe they thought about that. But I actually think they had these kind of ideas way before Valheim released, as these rugs and some of that other stuff was in the game files for a long time. Now a lot of people assume this was just conveyed into what we get when we fight the assistant boss manager and stuff, lightning shards coming out, but this was a trap that you could place, so maybe they had an idea about being really out there in the future. Futuristic weapons and defenses and stuff like that. But yeah, again, you can see why maybe it just didn't fit the rest of the game at that time. Maybe something they might work on. I kind of feel like we got the orc traps and they probably do the same job as these now in terms of stun and damage. There used to be something called the pebblet holder or carrier, and seemingly it seems like it's just a place for you to dump your pebbles. It's a pebblet dumper. But maybe it could have been a base defense item. It was listed in the area with traps, so maybe you could activate it. But to me, it does seem like it was just something that you would put your pebbles in as an extra storage chest. There's been a few other bits as well, like at one point there was one of the chairs from the laboratory and a lot of players seem to want to have them in their bases. I don't think that's ever going to happen, and I guess that's really it. Other than maybe some diving gear that had an actual proper diving sort of look about it, like a scuba suit, which I couldn't find any footage of. That was the only other thing that I could think of that maybe I can't actually directly show. Hope that's been enjoyable, taking a look at the cut content that was a prototype, the leaked content, stuff that just might not come or will maybe eventually arrive, but maybe with a re-up in terms of doing stuff to it, making it different, more useful, more fun. If it doesn't, I'm sure the Grounded devs know what they're doing. They're going to be adding even more better things to the game. Go and check out the part 1 if you haven't already seen it. My name is Jade. I'm here for all the long term. Grounded guides, gameplay and news. Until next time, ratbags, laters.